once you can clearly define a pathway where farmers can say, yes, I can understand the direction that we're going, this is going to be good for the environment, but it's also going to be good for my own pocket and my own individual farm profitability, then at that stage, it makes common sense.
Hello, I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glenn.
Your Teagasc Sustainability Advisors. And you're welcome to the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast number 53, bringing you the latest information, science and opinion to improve farm sustainability.
We would love to hear from you and get your opinions on what's discussed on the show. In order to contact us, you can email the Environment Edge podcast at teagasc.ie. Please feel free to ask questions or even make suggestions on topics you might like to hear discussed on the show.
The grass and crop season is starting to ramp up now as weather improves, and that comes with the use of sprays to control weeds, fungi and pests in order to protect our crops. How well are we doing in Ireland in regards to reducing the impact on water quality?
Paul O'Brien, Chair of the IFA Environmental and Rural Affairs Committee, joins us to discuss his role with the National Pesticide and Drinking Water Action Group. So Paul, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you, Deirdre.
So Paul, you're on the National Pesticide and Drinking Water Action Group. Can you tell us a little bit about this group and what they're all about?
Probably about 2016-17, this pesticides working group was set up, and the reason was because pesticides were showing up in drinking water. So the whole of the industry, starting from the Department of Agriculture, other people included would be the Animal Plant Health Federation of Agricultural Agrochemical Retail Merchants, HSE, the Irish Farmers Association, the ICMSA, Irish Water, the local authorities, the National Federation of Group Water Schemes, even Teagasc, and so we all meet. We meet probably 3 or 4 times a year, Deirdre, to kind of go through what's happening, to give us a kind of a true picture of maybe the exceedances levels that have happened in the previous accounting period, and it gives us a good kind of understanding of the trends that are happening and maybe individual catchments that are coming under, I suppose, considerable pressure or constantly being, exceeding. And then there could be more of a bigger issue that, needs to be looked into.
Pesticides, it's a huge term as well, isn't it, Paul? Like, it encompasses, say, herbicides, fungicides, algicides, rodenticides, nematodicides, and even more. So it encompasses a huge variety of different products.
It does indeed, and I think the for careful of, and I suppose to have the most worry about, Deirdre, is that it's the MCPAs and the Roundups, the glyphosates, that seem to be the knowing, and obviously a lot of that is seasonal. So if you're spraying off a field with Roundup to maybe establish a new grass crop, at certain times of the year. And MCPA would be the same, like particularly if you're trying to destroy maybe rushes on a kind of on a field where there would be probably a traditionally high water table anyway, where water levels would be high. This is where the recurring theme is that unfortunately, yes, all pesticides can be can be traced, and their exceedance levels can be picked up, but it really is the 2 recurring ones, the glyphosates and the MCPA, that are the most concerns.
So, Paul, look, I suppose if we didn't have an issue in Ireland, the committee that you sit on wouldn't be working, I suppose. So there is certain exceedances for herbicides in our water. And I know the bar is quite high for detecting pesticides in our water, but how is Ireland actually doing?
Well, I think, the reason why this was set up in the first place, because there did seem to be a problem. And the problem, if you don't face the problem could escalate and go out of control. However, when we did meet at the very, very start, and as I said, this was the previous environmental chair of the IFA met them before I joined the committee even. So 2017, there was a problem. What we are now seeing is clearly that, yes, things are improving. And I'll just give you some figures. In 2022, we had 40 exceedances. But bringing that back to 2020, there was 81 exceedances. So we are improving, and we're improving probably for a number of reasons, Cathal. Obviously, all farmers who are spraying have to be trained. So you have to go through the professional users of pesticides. So you have to do your couple of days training. You have to make sure that your sprayer is, obviously calibrated and is working properly. So not only that, but I think the bigger picture here, Cole, is that we just need to make sure that when we are spraying, we're doing it correctly. We're waiting for the weather conditions to allow us to do that. We're using enough buffer zones between any water courses and any potential spray drift. So it's just a lot of this is very, very common sense. But thankfully, we are improving. But that's not to say we can't improve a bit more.
Yeah, the World Health Organization seems to have a level of tolerable limits, whereas the EU have taken a zero tolerance attitude towards pesticides. And I suppose with that in mind, what do you think are the options within the new amendment of the SUD directive, Paul?
It is always the European ambition to have the highest bar environmentally throughout the world. And, we see that with many, many other different parts of particularly the farm to fork aspect of the Green Deal, Deirdre. The use of, so referring back to maybe the Sustainable Use Directive, where they're looking for a considerable drop in actually pesticide use going forward. I think the problem is that there has to be a level of common sense, because we do live in our climate is wet. We need the ability to be able to use pesticides on our tillage crops. We do live in what would be classed as very much a moist climate, a damp climate. So therefore, we have to be able to use these pesticides, but it's using them correctly. It's using them at the right time, and it's using them when weather conditions allow us to use them. So when there's no wind, and as I say, it makes no sense whatsoever from a farmer's point of view to be spraying the ditch when you're meant to be spraying the field, to be spraying the dike when you're meant to be spraying the field. This is a loss of money. It's a loss. It's pure common sense, basic financials. And I'd say the same about fertilizer usage too. If you're using a product that's expensive, use it correctly. Because ultimately, if you're losing it, you're losing money and you're harming the environment. So a lot of pressure then comes on agriculture. What are you doing? You need to strengthen our green credentials. The society is not going to allow us to damage or harm the environment anymore, Deirdre. So, we have to understand all of that. But when it comes from a European policy direction, we have to be very aware that, we are now dealing with a different mindset in Europe. Some people call it an ideology. Some people say, okay, there's a passion to deliver proper, green credentials, but somewhere there always has to be a middle. We need to use pesticides. We need food production. And as a result of all of that, I've been absolutely asking farmers, just when you're using pesticides or herbicides or insecticides or any of the chemicals that you use, just use them with common sense, with your eyes very wide open to the potential harm you could be creating. Because ultimately, if we keep losing Roundup to groundwater, if it is showing up in exceedances levels in drinking points, then at that stage, it puts more pressure on us as an industry to be able to retain the benefits of using glyphosate going forward.
I suppose that's why there's a huge emphasis now on IPM and resistant breeding and other agronomic characteristics, isn't there, going forward,
I suppose when it comes to IPM, yes, like we are on this journey, we have to trust that the guys in Oak Park who are doing the research for us are doing a good job, and I have every faith in their ability to do that, Deirdre. But I think the thing is that yes, once you can clearly define a pathway where farmers can, say yes, I can understand the direction that we're going. This is going to be good for the environment, but it's also going to be good for my own pocket and my own individual farm profitability. Then at that stage, it makes common sense. But yes, new technologies, I'm sure, going to be created. But now the bar is getting higher. We have to be smart when we're using chemicals. And I hope this is going to be the message of the day.
Paul, I think you've just nailed it there. We have the answers. We have the solutions to how to reduce the pesticides getting into our water. And I think you've touched on it very heavily today. It's about the knowledge transfer and trying to, support farmers and educate farmers and take those simple steps. And that'll probably be a lot of the solution for us if we can get every farmer to jump on board on that.
I think, Carl, like farming it's all about kind of windows of opportunity. Here we are today after a very wet March, where not much field activity has happened, particularly on tillage fields. Not as much slurry has probably been spread, not as much fertilizer has been spread. So when the opportunity arises, you will see every tractor in the country out very, very busy. But it's all about limited opportunities. So the window of opportunity to go out and use that has to be maximized, but it also has to be done without taking too many shortcuts. So when you see something going wrong, it's because a farmer is probably under too much pressure. He's probably trying to get too much work done in one particular day. He's always looking over the shoulder to see, what the weather forecast is coming the next day, or he's always very focused on the fact that, this is my small window of opportunity. And so there is a lot of pressure on farmers that way. And look, as less and less people are involved and as farms become maybe more single-handedly run, and as we're dependent on contractors more and more, there is pressure in the system. But look, I'd be just saying, look, don't take shortcuts. Try your very, very best to do as a professional job as you possibly can. So, maybe that is the message today. Everything's expensive. The diesel in the tractor is expensive. The chemical you're using is expensive. Just use that to be able to come along, and a bit of common sense. Always check the weather forecast. Always make sure you're adhering to buffer zones. It's because ultimately the pressure is on us to be able to retain the licenses for some of these chemicals. If they keep showing up in exceedances levels in water quality, then that's going to put pressure on whether these licenses will be renewed going forward. And that's always my big concern. We're very heavily dependent on glyphosate.
Yeah, I think for a long time, Paul, that a lot of farmers just didn't realize that such a small amount of chemical can actually be detected in water and control the whole thing out. And now I think that understanding is starting to come in. And I suppose it's great to see groups like yourselves and even self and Deirdre are working in the area where we're trying to reinforce efforts. And I think your group, the NPDWAG group, put out a lovely video. One of our advisors, Mary Roach, actually, a couple of years ago, on just those general practices that you've mentioned. And it's a lot of farmers have commented back to me that how beneficial that type of communication is.
I think, Carl, you can never have enough knowledge. And that's why, look, you did mention knowledge transfer. And I think, look, it always should be maybe the very, very first part of the meeting, or most certainly maybe the take-home message from that meeting. Look, when you're doing things, try to do them as best as you possibly can at a professional level. If everyone does everything by the book, we should never have a problem. And look, I agree. Farmers with smartphones now, they watch plenty of videos and they see this. So, it's probably no harm every so often for a farmer to refresh their memory, to go back and look at some of these old videos and maybe say to themselves, okay, yes, when I was out spraying this morning, did I do this? A lot of this is very much common sense, but most certainly, we have a duty, we have an obligation. We seem to be attacking the media for all we're doing wrong. We need to be looked upon and say, okay, then every individual farmer has the ability to maybe change someone's opinion of farming that day and improve it in a very in a better and a more positive light.
So we've seen exceedances here in Kilkenny over the years and perhaps in Wexford as well. And, it's what you do then thereafter to try and prevent it happening again, like your Teagasc events, your discussion groups, your meetings, your one-on-one consultations, trying to get the message out there, that, it's not acceptable. I suppose another area that, could cause a particular issue as well, and there's less training, is the whole area of amenity and recreational and domestic use of pesticides, isn't it there, Paul?
I think that's one of the big things that we would say that probably was unfair over the last number of years, Deirdre, because farmers have had to come along and put money into their sprayers. They've had to come along and do a 2 or 3 day course in order to become efficient at being able to use the sprayer and to really get a good understanding of what happens if you change even different nozzles. But I think, one of the ones that was always there was that any individual person could just walk into a hardware store and buy any amount of or round or glyphosate. That's slightly now changed because a lot of the products that do appear in these hardware stores or garden centres have become a little bit more watered down. But up until recently, you could walk into any hardware store and buy any amount of glyphosate you wanted. There was no asking who you were, where you were going to be using that. There was no kind of anybody. And you used to drive around the country, and it will happen again this summer. There's no doubt that you'll see places where the whole kind of pathway is absolutely red with being used with glyphosate. Now, the problem is that once you use something in exceedance, it will eventually, if it's not being used and utilised, it's all waste. But what will happen is that will be washed away by the next rainfall event, and that will appear. The 2 biggest incidences that I can recall in my time at National Pesticide Drinking Water Action Group are, and I'm not going to name the counties, but one of them was a GAA pitch where obviously spread too near a watercourse and exceedances were detected. And another one was on a building site where there was a school being built. And, so it's not only farmers. Farmers have a role to play, yes, but it's everybody who is using pesticides. They have to realise of the potential damage. And I think, look, Carl mentioned about the exceedances levels. Yes, it only takes 1 drop of MCPA to do as much damage as 1 drop has the ability to be detected in an Olympic-sized room. We have to, that's really where we need to be concentrating. That, yes, everybody has a duty of care. Everybody has the ability to probably do a little bit of, just be a little bit more smarter, even if it's just your knapsack. Just be careful.
I suppose the other point is the farming sector is heavily regulated, whereas maybe the amenity use is not as heavily regulated.
And that's something that, in all honesty, we have looked for the farming groups. Is that so? If anybody walks into a hardware store or so there needs to be some sort of a register, something to be able to link back to say, okay, then look, we're trained, we've paid to be trained to, study read the recipe or read the kind of the prescription to know exactly how much water we should be mixing in. But before that, I would say there was heavy concentration of product actually physically going out on, for people who weren't trained. So we're looking for a little bit maybe of fairness. A lot of things have been pointed to. It must automatically be assumed it's agriculture. But those 2 incidences, that's that GA and that building site, they want agriculture, but still they still fall into the kind of the pesticide exceedance levels because they're using a product that will be predominantly used by agriculture. There's no doubt about that, Deirdre. But the reality is that there are other people that are able to get their hands on it. And if they're not using it efficiently enough, then it has the potential to cause damage.
So we have a lot of legal requirements coming down the line, Paul, that we're going to have a big pesticide cut anyway over the next number of years. And you mentioned integrated pest management and maybe the use of different options apart from chemical. How close are we to that, do you think? Are farmers interested in going down that route?
Well, I think farmers will be interested to go on that route if it's clearly explained to them. If they can see that there's going to be no potential loss of yields, then yes, I think it can be very, very clearly explained. And, that's all a part of the whole, as I say, the guys in Teagasc are able to give good advice in KT meetings or in meetings with farmers, and particularly, and then also one-to-one. But you see, I think the whole point is that, yes, we are all coming under pressure under the Sustainable Use Directive. But the reality is that Ireland is its climate means that we do need the ability to be able to spray certain times of the year. Now, our level of spraying is dramatically down on our rest of the colleagues in Europe, our other European farmers. So it shouldn't be just a target. Ireland's target is X, so therefore if you reduce that by 50%, maybe the understanding should be Europe's target is X amount, we reduce that by 50%. Other countries might have to do more than Ireland, but most certainly when it comes to us compatible spraying with other European countries, we are a very low spraying. We don't spray a lot of our grassland in fairness, but we do need the ability for our tillage farms to be able to grow.
Paul, there's been mention of sensitive land types within these changes. Like you'd expect maybe NHA or SAC lands to be falling under this remit. But is there a mention of nitrate vulnerable zones falling within these zones?
Well, I haven't heard that, Deirdre. I would have concerns about that because, look, I can understand if a land has been designated as a high nature value or SAC, that covers a lot of ground in the country. We are looking at things such as the nature restoration law, which is coming down the line in the next couple of months. So that looks like a much higher level of ambition, not only by the EU, but also our own government to say, okay, then X amount of lands will have to be reinstated or restored. So therefore, then at that stage, you are saying a considerable amount of land, up to 7% of the total land in the country, will just go on to nature restoration. So if you're looking at those figures, it is going to be very, very challenging. We also have to concern about, whether we're going to have enough food to be able to reduce on one thing or another. There are biodiversity targets that we have to achieve. But the reality is that, yes, I can see that those areas are going to come under considerable pressure. When it comes to nitrogen zones, I think that still has to be argued and debated. But most certainly, I would suggest it's the type of farm land, because of its soil type, particularly your heavier peatier type soil where you have much higher water table. That's probably going to be the area of the most spotlight at the very, very start. And there's no doubt about it. Look, the reality is that you have a high water table, you've probably rushes growing. You only get a very limited opportunity at certain times of the year to be able to go with, appliances or, sprayers or weed lickers on quad bikes to be able to do that sort of work to carry out. And so it is going to be very much land type specific on the regulations coming down. A lot of these regulations, we haven't, they're not very clearly defined yet. There's a lot of work happening, as I said, on nature restoration. You're talking about a 7% increase, 7% of total land area could be included in nature restoration. That's going to be another challenge of a different type, Deirdre.
We'll have to watch the space to see what's coming then.
It's a very movable place at the moment, believe you me, in the Commission.
Yeah, look, Paul, It's clear that there's a lot of work done and lots more to do, and trends are certainly improving, which is good for us. And I suppose we have to just keep putting our shoulders to the wheel to try and reduce that more and more over the years. Just really like to thank you for your time today, Paul, for joining us on the show.
Look, it was a pleasure. And take home message, Carl, just when you're doing stuff on your farm, just make sure you're doing it with the knowledge that you could potentially do damage, but you could also threaten the ability for us to be able to maintain licenses for that chemical going forward as well. That's the take-home message.
That's it for this episode of the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast. Thanks to Paul O'Brien, Chair of the IFA Environmental and Rural Affairs Committee, for joining us on the show.
Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Georgia Glenn.
Join us next time for the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast, signpost to farm sustainability.